Meanwhile, U.S. Vice President VP Vance has defended the continued military presence in Los Angeles, saying troops remain essential despite a recent lull in protest. Now, speaking to reporters while greeting Marines stationed in the city, Vance warned of a possible resurgence in unrest following earlier demonstrations over immigration rates. His remarks comes amid criticisms of the federal deployment as an overreach. Roughly 4,000 National Guard members and 700 Marines were sent by President Donald Trump to protect federal infrastructure after protests turned violent. Vance emphasized that the threat of renewed clashes justifies the sustained deployment, describing the troops as a stabilizing force in a city still on the edge.
Fortunately, a lot of these federal buildings were under very serious threat. I heard about a lot of that during my tour here today. And the reason I'm here is I just wanted to hear from the law enforcement officials themselves, the state officials, the local officials, but also the federal officials, what's actually going on here on the ground. And I think there's some good news. And the good news is the rioting has gotten a lot better. But the bad news is, as I heard from everybody, unfortunately, the soldiers and Marines are still very much a necessary part of what's going on here because they're worried that it's going to flare back up. And what do I mean when I say flare back? Well, I was hoping Jose Padilla would be here to ask a question, but unfortunately, I guess he decided not to show up because there wasn't the theater. And that's all it is. You know, I think everybody realizes that's what this is. It's pure political theater. These guys show up. They want to be captured on camera doing something. They want to be able to go back to their far left groups and to say, look, me, I stood up against border enforcement. I stood up against Donald Trump. When all they're really standing up for is for drug cartels to run rampant over our country and sex traffickers to be able to continue to traffic little kids into our country. That's what you're doing when you stand against border enforcement.
But joining us virtually from New York to dissect these issues is a Rising International analyst, Rotimi Kade. Welcome, Rotimi. So good to see you. Now, let's quickly get into it. Should we see this as a temporal victory for Donald Trump?
So it should be seen as a temporary victory for either Donald Trump or the protesters, or perhaps maybe the state of California. What we've seen so far is actually pretty much, a far cry from what is expected in cases like this, where you have crisis in a city like California, Los Angeles to be precise, in a fashion that has not subsided over the past few weeks. But what we've seen so far is more like we're going back to the campaign trail, where Democrats and Republicans throwing jabs at each other. But this time, this is more critical when you look at it from the perspective of how could a city like Los Angeles, be so degenerated to a crisis point. And what the vice president said in that is, in as much as is trying to throw some support and some morale boosting confidence, so to speak, to the federal enforcement officers like ICE and the Marine Corps that was deployed, which is still very controversial. He quickly and swiftly returned to the campaign trail rhetorics. In some ways, that has not really helped, and that would not help what is currently on ground right now, because the crisis is not just within the immigrants and also the federal law enforcement officials, but the crisis also is between federal and state governments fighting over who has authority to enforce those laws.
Well, Rotimi, I was just going to ask, what exactly do we expect to happen from here? Do you think this is going to embolden the Trump administration to indeed possibly stick with this plan of indeed deploying National Guards? And then, if possible, do you think this recipe might just be used in any other state where we see something sort of a protest?
Well, first of all, Ferdinand, the federal government, the Trump administration, they've already scored a point against the state government. You could see that the appeal court actually said that they have the right to deploy Marine Corps officials into on the streets of California, which is actually noble in itself in terms of, we've never seen that in a very long while. You want to expect a city like Los Angeles or a state like California having all the wherewithal to deploy, you know, state police and other, security apparatus that is being sponsored by the states to curb this crisis. But what we've seen basically in the past is seeing federal law enforcement officers being deployed to a state, which makes it even more aggravating, for the people of California. Especially California is more diverse. They share borders with Mexico. And I could tell you that it's almost like a free entry into Los Angeles or California in general. And some people have been there for a very long time. And for what we've seen so far, we've seen families, generations who are standing up and saying, no, this is not the way to go. And perhaps, the federal government will find a way to do that. But again, don't forget during the campaign trail, the Trump administration said there won't be anything like Sanctuary City when they assume office for the second term. And it looks more like a targeted situation than, just trying to enforce laws, because we've not seen this kind of raid, this kind of disruptions in other cities, like, especially the southern cities like Texas, like, Florida. We've not seen that. So some people, some political, analysts believe that, hey, this is a targeted, attempt to actually on California. And if the president wants to replicate this recipe, as you call it, into other cities, we're yet to see. Perhaps, as we've seen in California, the result could be even more triggering in other states, perhaps maybe like New York.
Well, quite very interesting. And though you did mentioned it earlier, but then let's go back and then take a look at JD Vance and exactly, how he's gone about it, telling everybody that, yes, well, this is actually the best thing for now. But do you think at this moment this has impacted the police in Los Angeles in any way? Does it undermine the police in Los Angeles?
Well, from what we know, the state police, they're not part of this raid. We've seen the ICE officials, which of course began this raid from the get-go. And because they were sort of overwhelmed, the federal government deemed fit to actually deploy the National Guard onto the streets of California, which similarly is looking like they have now been, overstretched. And with JD Vance presence in California is just to repose confidence of the federal government and resources that this is going to be a long-term project that would help in restoring peace and order. What the vice president said in terms of how to, give the confidence to the federal officials is the right step in the right direction. But what was wrong in that statement is the fact that it looks more like they are not working with the state government. It went straight for the jugglers of the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, and also the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, which in some way would not help the whole situation. So that's why we're seeing, this spiraling out of control. And rather than the vice president to actually come in and sort of find a balance, with, more or less the state government and perhaps maybe the local government in terms of, what we've seen is a far cry from that. It has decided to move in a different direction. Perhaps maybe that's the position of the federal government. But the lasting piece I will tell you will be the cooperation of this federal, state, and local government, in this case, to actually quell the crisis at hand.
Well, we will continue to keep tabs on the ongoings over there. Thank you so much, Rotimi, for being a part of the program.
You're welcome.